You're listening to the Racer to Racer podcast presented by Race 92. Race 92 is a vintage-inspired racing apparel brand specializing in celebrating vintage race culture and adapting to motorsports today. Check out race92.com for all your racing merchandise needs. I'm your co-host, Aaron McAteer. Other co-host you may have seen walking out of Barber Lounge 459 with a big old smile on his face. You've probably seen him at a dirt track. He is a one and only Mr. Scott Bowie.
Hello, Aaron.
Hello, Scott. How are you?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm good. So this will be released on Wednesday, but by the time people listen to this, we will have had our first live show in McGilvery's. So if you came out, we appreciate it. We don't even know how the show is going to go on this point, but thanks for coming out.
That's right. No, to anybody that comes, like he said, thankful you came, and anybody that didn't come, you're dead to us.
Maybe to Scott, not to me. I believe in second chances.
Yes, I do too. You're not dead to me.
So, quick thank you to some of our, sponsors. First off, thanks for McGilvery's for, allowing us to put together the show. Brendan McGilvery's the manager there, who's been very accommodating with helping us set up testing our equipment and stuff like that. So thank you to her. Thank you to Racer Collect, who's kind of been with us from almost the beginning. Well, pretty early on. Patrick Patton, great guy. Definitely check out Racer Collect for any racing memorabilia needs that you're looking for. Top Gun Racing, Grand King Racing helped us put together the McGilvery's deal and also sponsoring the show. So special thanks to Billy and Stephanie. And I will remind everyone, November 11th, November 12th. We are doing a live show. When I say we, I'm a part of it. Poor Scott decided not to be a part of it. But
I know my limitations.
we will be doing a live speaking event with Rainey Lanier, believe it or not, November 11th and November 12th, and he will be doing a book signing as well. You can get tickets by contacting Grand King Racers on Facebook and giving Stephanie Throckmorton a call, and that information can be found actually on our podcast page on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and also, like I said, on Facebook through Grand King Racers. And lastly, when you have a great looking guy like Scott Bowie with nice flowing hair, part of your podcast, you want to make sure he is comfortable. And thanks to the Good Guys at Good Guys Heating and Cooling, he is as cool as an igloo in the summer and hot as a lava stone in the winter. You too can be like Scott Bowie. Call Good Guys Heating and Cooling today.
Man, you really went in. You did some writing this week.
I did writing about 10 minutes ago.
Well, I'm impressed.
Thank you. But yeah, not a lot of racing news. We'll keep this short and sweet and to the point because interview today is Gary Gerould, who was absolutely fantastic interview, great guy to talk to. Definitely exceeded my expectations. I definitely expected a lot. I mean, it's Gary Gerould, so I knew it would be very entertaining and good. But man, he had some great stories and just a true legend. I mean, really of motorsports broadcasting and of broadcasting in general. I mean, he's a voice of the Sacramento Kings. But yeah, no, great guy, was around racing kind of in the early stages of, broadcasting with Paul Page, Bobby Unser. A lot of cool stories. So definitely, I think everyone will enjoy it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Same as you. It was far exceeded my expectations, and just a good guy. I mean, he loves what he does, and it comes through, and that's all you can want. I mean, right? I mean, he's just a stone cold professional.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a lot easier when I'm not taking away from anyone else on the show, but when you're interviewing someone like him who is a professional, literally does what we're doing for a living, it's really easy, and they make it a lot easier to interview them for sure.
Well, they definitely carry us, or at least me. So that no, yeah, just everything you said, and And I said this last week, and I told him this. I think the job he does is very important. Not because he's calling sports, but in a lot of ways, he comes into people's homes, and
Yeah.
he becomes, like, for some people, maybe the only person they hear that day, or whatever, as far as if they're kind of a
Right.
shut in, or if they're older, that type of thing. It's something they can really look forward to. So I think what he does is not only fun for him, but I think it's very important for others.
Yeah, I mean, people have jobs and they have other commitments, and watching sports is something, or listening to sports is something people look forward to. So, I mean, he's a source of people's entertainment, and that goes for anyone in broadcasting, and even ourselves, right?
Right. To a
If
lesser
if
degree,
we're the
for
best,
sure. But
if we're the best thing someone has to look forward to for a day, I may be a little concerned.
nah, I mean,
No.
when I was a little kid, my grandfather owned a pool hall. My mom and I would go see him at night. Uh, Later on, like in the evening when Cardinals games would be on, I remember Jack Buck would be doing the broadcast, Mike Shannon, people like that. And I just remember my grandfather listening to those games while we're talking, and maybe that's where my romanticism for it comes from. But it is, I mean, it becomes a part of your life, and it becomes something you look forward to. And so I personally, like I've said 20 times already, I think it's a great thing.
Oh, absolutely. Well, not a whole lot of racing news. So, I mean, Texas NASCAR, Tyler Reddick won. I did not watch the race.
A lot of tire issues, a lot of drivers complaining about the track. Very common for Texas. Um, Not so much the tire issues, but drivers complaining about the track. Kyle Larson would like to make it a 3/4 mile, completely dismantle the place. I'm not a driver. I have no idea what the complaints are really about. Everybody has to race on the same tracks. So, who knows? I do feel bad when I look at the Texas grandstands. They went from being completely full for so many years with anything that ran there. Now
Right.
you could, I mean, they're empty, and they got covers covering up giant sections of seats. So, I mean, either seats have to be removed, or track has to be reconfigured. Something needs to happen to keep that place viable. So hopefully they do keep it viable. Other than that, USAC ran Eldora, um, Four Crown. Mitchell Moles won the first night in the midgets. Second night, he took a pretty good crash. He is all right. Buddy Kofoid blew a tire. He and Chance Crum then crashed. Um, Justin Grant won the sprint car race. I'm forgetting who won the Silver Crown race and the second midget race. Again, I did not do show prep, but I did watch it. It was good racing, hard racing, as Eldora always is. So that's pretty much it, though. I mean, oh, I know who won. Logan Seavey won the Silver Crown race. He has pulled within a tie now of Cody Swanson, and they go to the mile at Springfield next. And for the life of me, I cannot remember who won that second midget race. Oh, it may have been Chris Wyndham. I think it was Chris Wyndham.
Hmm.
But so anyway, that's kind of what happened over the weekend in USAC. Other than that, like I said, not much racing. It's that time of year. When you own a parts store, this is the time of year I start getting very nervous
Right.
because less racing means less sales,
Sure.
um, especially in the Midwest. Teams are kind of finishing up around here, getting ready to head west within the month, to finish out the USAC sprint car season. So that's what I know.
Only other thing I think is worth mentioning is Jimmy Johnson recently announced that he will be retiring from full time racing. But obviously, still keep the door open to doing some racing. So I definitely think, and I know Carvana did announce that they will back him pretty much whatever he decides to do. So I think with that, I mean, he's definitely going to do racing. I definitely think we could probably see him in the 500 again. Know, like we were talking about earlier, or I was talking about to my dad to this. He's talking about wanting to do the double, so that'll be interesting to see if he can pull that off. I know he's talked
I didn't
about,
know that.
yeah, I know he's talked about racing in NASCAR again, so I could see him doing like the Daytona 500 again, probably. But I think he wants to do Le Mans. So I think he'll just kind of do kind of bucket list races at this point, and probably, like I said, Indy 500, even though he's already done it. And I mean, I don't think we can rule him out of wanting to do Texas or Iowa in IndyCar, right?
No.
Because he looked really good there, better than 95% of other people. So, yeah, no, I think he understands kind of where he fits in at this point. He definitely has made a lot of improvement this year. I know some people may say he hasn't, but you look what he did on ovals, definitely has. In road courses, I mean, he was definitely, looking a lot better.
Yeah, he looked a lot better on road courses. I don't know how far off he was every week, but I'm guessing between 4/10 and 7/10, which is a ton in racing, but I mean it's blinks of an eye. He's just a little off here or there, and um, and after this long, he's probably not going to find it. After 2 years of full time IndyCar road racing, he's probably not going to find that speed difference. Unfortunately, that probably is a bit of father time, or if it's not father time, it's definitely habits and things that he's having a hard time breaking. So I think that's great what he's doing. He definitely has earned it, and I think it's great. He wants to stay in the sport though, and still be a part of it. And um, it always makes me a little nervous when I see guys do that, because you kind of, if you're not, you're starting to hit and miss a little bit, and you're not running every weekend, and I don't know, it just starts feeling like you like your skills erode a
Yeah,
little bit more
right.
than maybe they are at this point. Where you're kind of keeping them honed, and maybe that's very unfair of me to say. It makes me a little nervous when guys say, I'm going to cut back my schedule and just run a handful of races. Usually, what you see is that the first part of that, it works really well, and by the end of it, it's not working out very well.
Right. No, absolutely. Really, like I said, not a whole much else going on, but next week. So next week the show will be releasing. Well, actually, next week's kind of up in there. So next week we may release the show from McGilvery's. So we may change it up a little bit next week. But soon we will be releasing an interview with Mandy Pouch. If you
Hmm.
don't know who Mandy Pouch is, it's somebody that I've definitely watched a YouTube channel for a while. I know you have too. And when we started this podcast, we definitely talked about getting her on. The name of the YouTube channel now, I believe, is Dirt Track Untold, right?
Yes.
So she's a YouTuber. Her whole family has been around racing her whole life. Her dad, and you'll have to fill in the gaps here, Scott.
Her dad's one of the best drivers, especially on the East Coast. Brilliant. He's won a lot of pavement races, won a lot of dirt races. He's won some major dirt races in his career. And he's really considered. I mean, I think if you asked guys who run against him, the Steve Kinzers and the Doug Wolfgangs of the world, I think they would speak very highly of her father, Billy Pouch Sr. He's a racer's racer. His son, Billy Pouch Jr., is a racer's racer as well. Um, Mandy has found her own way in the sport. She drove a little bit, but she chose she wanted to be a different part, be in the sport a different way. And she's married to Mike Mahaney, who's a great racer himself. We talk a little bit about the Fonda race. She's missing practice at night. They raced over the weekend. He ran third for the third year in a row at the Fonda race, which is a big paying race, a lot of laps. So yeah, it's just they are definitely racers. I mean, there is No two ways about it. You can put them right in the book with the definition. I mean, you could just define them as racers. And so that being said, it was a great talk. It was fun. Um, and it's definitely interesting to hear her side of it because she approaches it from more of a 360 view as having been the daughter, the girlfriend, now the wife, the sister, drove a little bit herself. She's in marketing. She can really see the sport from a lot of different angles, and it was an interesting talk.
Yeah, no, great talks. Definitely got the entrepreneurship mind, right? I mean, she's an entrepreneur,
Yes.
YouTuber. Anything she puts her mind to, she definitely gets it done. Social media influencer. I think is how one of the ways I introduced her. Just very very outgoing and very just a good personality and good person to talk to. So it was definitely a very good talk.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
But yeah, no, thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you haven't already, make sure you hit like and subscribe on YouTube. Also, check us out on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, anywhere where podcasts can be found. And yeah, hope everyone has a great week.
Yeah, everybody, take care.
Our guest today is a former pit reporter for IndyCar and is a broadcasting legend. He is also the radio voice for the Sacramento Kings. We are joined by Gary Gerould. Gary, it's an absolute honor to have you on. As you know, we've had a lot of broadcasting greats of racing on, Paul Page, Jack Gerould, Mark James, who's the current voice of the Indianapolis 500. So to add you to that great list of people is pretty cool. And you're definitely someone we've wanted to talk to for some time. So I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Hopefully, the questions won't be too tough. Hopefully, my aging memory won't fail me at a critical moment, but we'll see how it goes here.
Hey, it won't be any worse than Scott's. I can promise you that. I'm kidding.
My memory can be pretty bad, so
Don't ever get old, Scott. Don't ever get old.
I'm fighting it, but I think I'm losing the fight.
So, Gary, where did the kind of your love for broadcasting kind of come about, or kind of what was your first kind of dabble in broadcasting?
I grew up in a small town in Michigan, north of you guys, Midland, Michigan. I was an only child. My father died while I was young. I think I was 12 years old. My mom frequently was ill, and I was really kind of forced to be on my own at a very young age, very frequently. I lived from time to time with our minister's family, with various neighbors when my mom was ill. But the place of refuge that I turned to, the local radio station, was only about a mile from my home. And I found myself going there virtually every evening. And so it didn't take an awful long period of time before I kind of got into the mix with the people at the radio station, and the disc jockeys and the sports guy and so forth. And I got a pretty good working knowledge of small town radio at a pretty early age. So as it turned out, I had my own show once a week, which was only a half hour, related mostly to school happenings, music, sports, things like that, at the age of 14, I believe it was 14, 15. And then I went to school not far from you guys in college in Anderson University. And I would come home in the summers, and I worked full time at the hometown radio station. And then I began to get a genuine appreciation and knowledge of small town radio. And I go through that because from as young as I can remember, I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. And I'm one of the fortunate few that can look back on my life and say, I got to do at a fairly early age exactly what I was hoping to be able to do. And then the radio experience eventually turned into television experience, and a very variety of opportunities opened up along the way.
Now I got to ask you. Now you obviously this is a time when disc jockeys were still disc jockeys. Kind of, I mean, for people my generation is kind of maybe the last generation. I'm 53. So just like the people right behind me know this, but disc jockeys were just as famous as in some areas as the musicians they played, right? And did you ever do like the rock jock thing and have a name, or was it always you didn't do all that?
No, it's funny because rock never really appealed to me. I was, whatever gene in my body, I liked the standards and kind of the old school. And I sprinkled a lot of that and some modern bit of jazz and one thing or another into the music shows that I was doing. I was known basically, I went by Mr. G. Boy,
See, we
that's
had a
creep.
name. We did have a name though.
Yeah, yeah. And then Mr. G somehow much later in my life turned into G-Man, and now most
Right.
people know me as G-Man, as many as know me as Gary Gerould. So it's kind of funny how those things evolve over a long period of time.
Oh, that's great. I always love those stories, man. Because that's back when radio had its own. Every radio station had its personality, and
Absolutely, yeah.
that's sadly gone today with all the programming and everything's just homogenized. But
Yep. Automated, homogenized. That's a great word because that's exactly what it's come. There doesn't seem to be character, and
right,
maybe you can look and say, okay, well, in talk radio, and in sports talk in particular, which I never was a fan of. It's now people trying to make a splash and make a name for themselves and make these outlandish remarks, trying to draw attention, and that just does not
you
resonate with me in the least.
you mean you're not a hot take guy? You're
I
not
am
hot
not a
take.
guy.
Oh, well, I respect that because I'm not a big fan of
Yeah.
hot take guys. That's for sure.
What was your first big I guess your first big break in, I don't know, pro sports and broadcasting? What was like the first thing you did with pro sports? Was radio I'm guessing it was radio, right?
Yeah, in kind of a remote way. In Michigan, Detroit, of course, was the closest market where they had professional sports teams. And at one point, when I was working for the local radio station, the Detroit Tigers used to make a tour, a barnstorming tour of the state, and they would hook up with their affiliates that carried Tigers baseball. And the very first big name sports personality, and you have to be old to appreciate this, but there was a great baseball player for the Tigers by name of Al Kaline. And he
Mhm.
was the first person that I ever interviewed of any legitimate sports stature. And, it just kind of continued to whet my interest. Uh, when my wife and we were married before our senior year in college. And then after graduating from Anderson, we ended up making the move. We were back in my hometown. I was working there. Her father was a minister, and I'll tell you just a couple of little stories about how strange sometimes things work out. But one day I get a call out of the blue. There's a fellow who was a fiery little Lebanese program director of a small station in Chico, California, which is about 100 miles north of Sacramento, where I now live. At any rate, he had run into my father-in-law, who would go into the radio station to record lead outs and lead ins to some of their Sunday programming that they had to do to meet their Federal Communications Commission obligation to maintain their license. So my father, as a minister, my father-in-law would do a quick lead in, and they'd do 28 minutes or so of religious programming, and then he would do the wrap up, and that would wrap it. He came out of one of the studios one day, and this Lebanese program director, his name was Don Baroda, and he was saying, "Preacher, what am I going to do? I just had to fire so-and-so, and I need somebody right now." And my father-in-law, who was a very stoic, large man, said, "Well, I have a son-in-law who's in radio in Michigan. Preacher, get him on the line right now." And 2 weeks later, my wife and I and our then 3-month-old infant daughter were headed cross country to Chico, California, to take up residency in Chico, where her parents obviously lived and where her father pastored the church. And so it was just one of those bizarre things, that the way it all turned out. And somewhere along the line, there were a couple of different stories too, where when I was in Michigan, I was doing news and sports, and I would always go to the local high school. Football was big in our community, had a state championship team, etc. And one night in the fall, I had just started working there, coming from Anderson, and went to the game, just sitting in the studio or sitting in the press box, observing. The sports director of the radio station, for whatever reason, he went out at halftime, allegedly to maybe have a smoke, maybe have a beer, I don't know. He didn't come back. And the program director, who was the engineer of the broadcast, turned to me and just said, well, it looks like you're going to have to do the second half of this football game. And so, with nothing other than a numerical program that had some names and numbers, I did the second half of that game, and then ended up doing the rest of the season. And so that was kind of my formal introduction to play-by-play sports on radio. We moved to California, to Chico. Short time after I was involved with the full-time on a radio basis, they also had a sister television station that had decided it was time to start doing local news. And they came to me and said, would you like to be our sports guy? I said, well, I know nothing about television. And as it turned out, for an extra $10, I think it was a night, 5 nights a week, I would sit in their television studio and do a 5-minute, basically a radio broadcast. But I did it in front of a studio camera. So I started to get a little bit of television experience. A couple of years in, I get a call from a fellow in Sacramento who was graduated from that particular television station that I was now doing a part-time sports stuff with. And he says, you don't know me. I worked for so many years at that station in Chico. There's a station here in Sacramento that's highly respected. Their news department, they're in need of a sportsman. And I think you would fill the bill. And so, again, 2 weeks later, my wife and I we make our move from Chico to Sacramento. And that was in 1965, believe it or not. And we've been here since. So funny how these things kind of work along the way. And one door opens up and you take a shot at it and you hope that it works out. Sometimes it doesn't work. And sometimes it works out amazingly in ways that you would have never even expected it to.
It's just having that courage to walk through the door, right? I mean, that's just that initial foot in front of the other and taking that leap of faith.
Well, and you do have, because I'm young, naive. I don't know the broadcast business. I certainly don't know it Sacramento is not a major market, but at that time, their news department at this station, it was an NBC affiliate. I ended up working there for 12 years. It was larger than any of the news operations in San Francisco or in Los Angeles. It was the news operation in the western half of the United States. And they had a great reputation. And we were really fortunate because that was my introduction basically while I was working there to the Indy 500. I was doing things you were allowed to. I mean, we went to the World Series, we went to the Masters golf tournament, we went to the Super Bowl, we went to Indianapolis to, generate reports leading to the 500. I, loved motorsports and kind of inadvertently got involved in it as a track announcer in Chico. I had a mobile unit, a car, a news cruiser, they called it. And, normally you're out going to political city council meetings, board of supervisors meetings, but you did the hard news. You went to the CHP, the highway patrol, you went to the sheriff's department, the police department on a daily basis. You knew all these people. You had a plectron in your bedroom so that if there was a structure fire, you were immediately aware of it. And you could go racing off in your news cruiser to report on the scene that, what was happening. Well, I would take the news cruiser to the fairgrounds in Chico on Friday nights because they ran hardtop races. And occasionally a couple of sprint cars would come in from the big city. And those were exciting nights. And, every 15 or 20 minutes, I'd do an update from the infield at the fairgrounds. Then it evolved into a track announcing job when we moved to Sacramento, and I really got immersed in the whole business. J.C. Agajanian, you may be familiar with that name. From
Oh yeah.
He was an IndyCar owner of note. Parnelli Jones was probably his most famous driver when he won driving Old Calhoun at Indy.
Right.
But Aggie took a liking to me and my work, and he started utilizing me as an announcer at various promotions he had for USAC events, primarily midgets and open competition shows. And I would work at Ascot down in Southern California. I worked at Manzanita in Phoenix, some of the great dirt tracks. And then he had promotions in Northern California, in Sacramento, San Jose, Vallejo, etc. And he would charter a plane to take people to Indianapolis on a 24-hour basis. The Saturday night before the race, you would leave the West Coast at 10 or 11 o'clock. You'd arrive in Indy at 5 in the morning, bus to the racetrack. You'd spend your time at the racetrack, but you had to leave regardless of the situation, rain, whatever, at 6 o'clock. Had to go back to the airport, get on that jet, fly back to the West Coast. So that was kind of my introduction to IndyCar. And then as I backtrack a bit, when I was working in sports in Sacramento, I told our news director and people at this news operation that we needed to be at Indianapolis the first week of the month of May to generate feature reports that related to various drivers and activities at Indianapolis. And so a cameraman and I each year would fly to Indy, spend the first week through the first weekend of time trials, and then go back. And we generate somewhere in the vicinity of 25 to 30 reports that ran on various newscasts. And through that, then, I really got immersed in, I got to know, Johnny Rutherford and Tom Sneva and some of these folks on a very casual basis because they were so good to me as a young guy coming up through the ranks. And then from there, I ran into Paul Page, and it was one of those deals where Paul was relatively new in his duties after Sid Collins had passed away and becoming the radio voice of the Indy 500. And they had a small radio network at the time that did Indy events. And I apologize, I'm kind of jumping all over the place here.
Oh, no, you're good.
Hey, you keep on jumping around.
It was fascinating because one day, I think it was a Friday, Paul calls me. I had met him once at Indianapolis. He knew literally nothing about me other than I worked in television in Sacramento and that I had a great interest in Indy cars and so forth. They had a race that weekend at Ontario in Southern California at Ontario Motor Speedway. And they needed help. And so Paul says, is there any chance on such short notice you could come to Ontario and join our radio network? And I said, well, yeah, I can do that. And so Sunday morning, I'm on a plane from Sacramento to Ontario. Somebody picks me up at Ontario, takes me to the racetrack. We're an hour and a half before the green flag to start the event. I meet Paul officially. He hands me a microphone and a pack, and he says, there's a place to plug this in just inside turn 2 at the head of the backstretch in the infield. And there was a small berm down there and about a 2-foot high embankment that was walled off, wood piling, as I recall correctly, and that was my spot. And so I went out there, and there no safety devices whatsoever. You got these race cars just screaming around, coming off turn 2 down the back straightaway. But there I am, and they told me how to turn the unit on and off and to check in with Paul, and we just totally winged it. And it worked so well, and it ended up that Paul and I ended up becoming great friends, and we ended up working together for 30 plus, close to 40 years, doing various events, mostly motorsports events, of course, but a lot of other shows as well for NBC. And he was largely responsible in convincing the people at NBC that I would be a good addition to various. So we ended up traveling the world and doing just tons of different things, from bobsled racing to unlimited hydroplanes to Formula One, NASCAR, IndyCars, any kind of motorcycle events. I mean, you name it. World of Outlaws, sprint cars, Knoxville, Iowa, the whole ball of wax. And so we've been great friends and close friends for a long, long period of time.
Well, I'll tell you, he's someone we've had on the show a few times, and he's so generous with his time. He's a very kind man, and I've really enjoyed talking to him.
He's got tails.
Plus he just has such a passion, especially for auto racing.
Yeah.
He
wrote a great book, and I don't know if you've read that book or not, but I've got, my phone is here, and you just went to a small page here. So I've got somebody who was calling me, and it's credit 9 from Slough House, California. Couldn't imagine that it might be a robocall, could it? Possibly.
Oh, it's probably not. It's probably you probably won the lottery.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. But anyway, Paul's book, which is over here on my desk. Hello, I'm Paul Page. It's race day at Indianapolis. You talk about his passion, and it really defines his passion. And now the home landline is ringing. So we're going to, pardon me just a second.
Oh, you're
here.
fine.
Hello. Okay. That was legit. It's a public utility agency we're in the midst of a monster heat wave out here.
Right.
And so they're urging people to, turn off the lights and, set your thermostat on your air conditioning a little higher, one thing or another. So that was legit. Pardon the interruption.
And don't do, and it probably said don't do podcasts either on your computer because it takes too much energy.
That kind of going back a little bit to when you very first sat down at that high school game, and it's on a whim, second half, and you just have that little sheet in front of you with the names and numbers. At that point, was it a thing of? Was it a thing of? Were you nervous, or was it a thing like finally? I finally get to do this.
I was too young and too dumb probably to have anything really sink in about it being finally. But in a sense, when I look back on it, it was in just such a strange way. It opened the door to me to be able to do exactly what I had wanted to do from as young as I could remember. And so It was very cool from that standpoint. And then when I went from my hometown in Michigan to Chico, California, and a couple of years that I spent there, I continued to do junior college football, basketball, high school football, basketball, things like that. And so it became, kind of a regular regimen, as well, as the fact that, when you're young and you got a young family and you're not making very much money working in small town radio, and the fact that I got $10 a game, man, that was huge. The fact that you do a couple of games in a weekend, and you add $20, and then the fact that they wanted me to start doing the TV thing, and I was doing a radio sportscast in front of a television camera, and I was getting an extra $10 for doing that, and you needed that. It was really, and then in moving to Sacramento, didn't make great money working at this big news operation, but that was certainly, in my mind, offset, as I mentioned, by being able to do all of those different big events. Now I've got somebody at my front door, and I have but this doesn't happen. What in the world is going on? This just doesn't happen on a normal Tuesday afternoon.
That's so funny.
I guess.
Well, if you need to take it, you can go take it real quick.
Well, that's all right. Well, I'll see if they persist or not. And thank you, Aaron. That's kind of you. At this point, let's keep rolling.
You're doing us a favor. So.
Yeah, you're the one doing us a favor.
Hey, so we talked about someone like JC Agajanian, and I think it's really important to acknowledge people like JC Agajanian who really, when you look at almost every facet of industry, there's usually someone who is the kind of the centerpiece, right? Is kind of the person that the spokes are attached to. And I'm like a JC Agajanian, a little bit different, like a Vel Miletich later on from Parnelli, um, and we could go on and on with names. Roger Penske, obviously. Um, these people are like so much being involved with these types of people lead to good things. And I just think it's always important to kind of acknowledge that those relationships. Like you'll meet a lot of people in your life, but every once in a while you meet a few that
Mhm.
makes such a huge difference.
Well, and I've been absolutely blessed along those lines over the
Paul
years.
Page, I got to say Paul Page too. I mean, he's done
Sure,
that with so many people.
that it's just you may not realize it at the time,
Right.
but you need to savor those opportunities and those relationships, and then it's important in your advancing years, I think, to look back and acknowledge those people and the contributions that they made. And certainly one of the things that, I mean, not only in motorsports but in virtually all professional sports, I've, after with the connections at NBC, I did everything from sumo wrestling to the NFL. I did about
Right.
50 NFL games as a play-by-play guy, and without the help of a JC Agajanian initially opening the motorsports doors, and then the relationship with Paul Page, and then getting to know the late Charlie Jones and Dick Enberg and Bob Costas and people like that, who, for whatever reason, kind of pick up your baton and encourage people to say, here's a guy that's got talent and he deserves an opportunity to showcase his talent, and then you make a decision. And as I say, I've been really, really fortunate and really blessed to have many of those people throughout my life. And I look back on it, and it's humbling. And you think of all of the places you've got to go and visit around the world and participate in various events. And then to be able to now, I'm getting ready to, in 2 weeks, I'll start my 38th year with the Sacramento Kings in the NBA. And for somebody, I'm 82 years old now, and I'm blessed with good health and blessed with the opportunity to still be able to participate and do these things. And there are not a lot of people at my age that have that chance and have that opportunity. And so I am always thankful, and I know that it can all turn in a heartbeat. And
Right.
contracts in today's, not only in sports, but I mean in any kind of business, they don't mean anything. Basically, if they want to make a change and they want a younger body in there and somebody who will do the job for 1/4 of what they're paying you, uh, see you, pal. You're long gone. But I'm fortunate also that I still have a passion for what I do. I really enjoy it. And yes, there are some hardships, and it's difficult, and everybody has challenges in terms of your family, and my wife's health is not great, and being she's been such a great supporter, but she needs my help. And when you go on 10 or 11-day, 12-day road trips, you got to have things in place that make sure that she gets the care that she needs while you're
Right.
gone. But uh, I kind of wandering a little bit here with that, but it's just part of the reality of a life that I always wanted, and I've been so fortunate to have.
Right. Well, I think here in Indy we had as far as basketball goes, obviously we got Mark Boyle and
Yep.
unfortunately the late great Bobby Slick Leonard.
Boom,
Uh,
baby.
that's
Yep.
right. Man, and he loved basketball so much, and he loved Indiana so much, and he loved the Pacers, and he went through a lot those last few years, and he'd still get out the games, and
Yep.
it's sad that he's gone. But anyway, you come into people's cars and their houses, and you really there's just a lot of, you become such a part of their lives that you're almost like a family member in a way. Like, you've described so many great events that the entire family shared, and I think that's just such a special thing.
And I think for a lot of people, kind of adding on what Scott is saying, is I think a lot of people like just watching sport events is their kind of getaway from, the stress in their life, their work, just any kind of stress they have in their life. It's what they enjoy. And you're a big part of, your voice is what they associate with, watching the Sacramento Kings or whatever that sporting event is.
It's very gratifying when you have people stop you and say, and this has happened just a handful of times within this last week. I try to play a lot of golf in the off season, and not that I'm not traveling anymore doing the motorsports stuff. And this last week, multiple times, someone would stop me and say, I grew up on Kings basketball listening to you. And you start thinking, well, 37 past years and 38 coming up, that is a long time. That's a couple of generations. And you don't normally think of those types of things, but it's very special when somebody tells you that. And when they may not recognize you, but it's always been bizarre to me when they'll say, wait a minute, I know the voice. You're the G-Man. It just, how does that happen? And I just, you're right. That's something that's really special. And it kind of goes with, and radio has changed so much. In radio, television now, not only, it's always been dominant, but now every team has every game televised.
Right.
So radio, basically, you have to think that the people who are listening are probably in their cars, and it's a commute time. And we've always noticed that, our ratings from a basketball standpoint in local radio in Sacramento, California, when the Kings are on the East Coast in a road trip and we're at drive time or prime time, on the West Coast, when you're in Boston or New York or Chicago, whatever, the numbers reflect that people are checking to see how the Kings are doing. And there are, I've seen a lot of bad basketball in 37 years with the Sacramento Kings. The stories, and I acknowledge that, and I know that that's part of it. But it's incumbent on me as a broadcaster, I believe, you try to make it as informative, as entertaining as you can, regardless of the situation. And there are nights, you're getting your brains beat out, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This club stinks tonight. You can't fool fans. They know what the deal is. And now that there's so much information that's accessible through social media, instant information, the crawl on the bottom line of the TV set during the game, score updates, one thing or another, that has made radio almost in some sense obsolete, but it still fills a very important role in my mind. And, up in Portland just a few weeks ago, they announced that they were doing away with their radio broadcast of the Portland Trailblazers. And the fans made such an outcry that the organization rescinded that notion. And now they've got radio back in the mix for this coming season. But I think that's a real concern over the coming years for professional sports and radio. I don't have the answer. I don't have the magic wall that's you look at and say, okay, here's what's liable to evolve out of this. But it's changed, and it continues to change. And I just hope that, while I'm still on this earth and I still have the opportunity to do what I enjoy doing so much, and that I can do it at a level that is informative and entertaining and can be fun. And on those nights when you're getting whooped big time, that's the biggest challenge a broadcaster has, in my mind.
Oh yeah.
The easy games are the tight back and forth games, and the one that get the buzzer beater. Those are the easy ones. Those are the ones we love. Those are the ones we remember. But hey, I also remember a couple of nights, when the Sacramento Kings lost by 62 points, when they lost by 58 points. And, you're challenging NBA records when things like that happen. Well, how do you make that interesting? And there are nights like that you're thinking, well, there can't be anybody still listening to this abominable performance. And yet then you'll find out somehow that you got diehards that are with you. And it's amazing. It fills some void in my being, and I think in any professional broadcaster's being, that, you have nights like that when you wonder if anybody cares, if anybody is there, and yet somehow they are there. And it's special to you. I don't know how else to describe it.
I think they should allow the announcers one game a year. You can just throw the towel in. Like, you can just throw the towel in, call the game. They can blame it on you. Everybody gets to go home.
We're out of here.
We're out of here.
Unfortunately, that's one of the things that people who followed my career with the Kings, on some of those nights, you just say, and you hope it doesn't come in the third quarter or early fourth, but it's you might as well fire up the jet, get out of here and get on to the next one, because this is a brutal night.
Well, with and I don't follow the NBA like I used to, but being a longtime Pacers fan, man, really, I think a lot of the small market teams kind of mirror each other in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And, And they go through ups and they go through downs, and they don't. Utah is one of the few that seem to have like a lot of years where they won. They may not have been the best, they may not have been the worst, but they always kind of seem to win.
Utah and San Antonio, I think, have been two examples of smaller market teams that have had, pretty solid success. And when you've got a John Stockton and a Karl Malone and a Jeff Hornacek for the Utah Jazz in years gone by, Mark Eaton, that tells you why they had success. And they had a great coach in Jerry Sloan. Then you go to San Antonio and you got a great Popovich, and you have a Tim Duncan or a David Robinson and those kinds of people to build around. You have great success. You got to have great coaching, but you've also got to have really good talent, and you got to be healthy in order to parlay it and make it all pay off somehow.
Well, you figure San Antonio has a horrible year. They get David Robinson. They go along. They play great for a number of years. They have a really bad year. They get Tim Duncan. Yeah. I'm like, how fair is that?
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. How you can't even script that. And then the Pacers ended up trading Leonard to the Spurs. People forget Kawhi Leonard was a Indiana Pacer.
Yeah. Well, we picked up Domantas Sabonis from you guys this last season, and Tyrese Halliburton, who Kings fans absolutely loved, and I know Pacer fans are already loving him, and he's going to be a cornerstone of things in the future. And but it doesn't make any difference what sport it is. You got to have the right pieces, and just like in motorsports. And I noticed there, Aaron, by the way, that I can't see Scott's T-shirt fully, but I saw you got a Bobby Unser shirt on.
Yeah, so this is actually a shirt company that I'm involved with. I designed it. So we had a deal with Bobby Unser, and unfortunately he passed. I guess it was last year at this point. Kind of lost track of time. But we did 3 or 4 designs with him, and he approved them and all that. So yep, Bobby Unser.
Love it. Son, I'm telling you.
Everybody's got a Bobby Unser, don't they?
Oh my. I spent a lot of years with Bobby, not only when he was driving one thing or another, but then he became a broadcaster. We all worked together at ABC and with Sam Posey and Paul and different folks. And Bobby was one of my favorite people of all time. And I just, it's so sad that, we don't have him anymore. We don't have Big Al anymore. And it's just, but that's the way it goes. But what a great life. And you talk about a guy who could tell stories, and I know you've probably heard you share over the years, but Uncle Bobby was one of the great storytellers of all time.
Whether it was true or not, or at least maybe his version of the story, it was always good, right?
Absolutely. And the thing that I will never forget about Bobby, he had a huge fear of heights. And there were different times when he would have to do his open out on, the roof of a grandstand at a racetrack somewhere. And, oh, Father, I don't know if I can do this. And he would always turn to a couple different ones of us and he'd need help with his open. Help me, Gigi, help me structure, help me. What do I need to say? Paul's going to ask me this and Sam's going to do this, but what do I need to say today? And so, we'd help him and get a couple of thoughts together. But remembering him and his fear of heights. And one time up in Vancouver, everybody loved Vancouver. And there was a place called Grouse Mountain, and you could take a tram went up a couple of 1,000 feet, and they had a great restaurant up there. And one night we were all going up before the event to have dinner, and we convinced Bobby to go, but we almost had put a bag over his head and physically put him on the tram. He just, on that tram ride up the top of the mountain, it was terrifying for him. And I mean, yeah, we joked about it, but he had a legitimate fear of heights. But it was so great to have him actually make that tram ride up there and have dinner with us that night. Some of the things that you never forget about Uncle Bobby.
Well, it's so funny too, because he flew. And by all accounts, was not the world's greatest pilot. I mean,
he had a great story
his way
about flying over San Francisco one time, and he was in restricted airspace. He put and this is Uncle Bobby. I believe him. He said, I put that thing on autopilot, and then I'd step out of the seat and get in the back. I'd be paying my bills and one thing or another. He says, I looked up and I did a double take and there's a fighter jet right outside the window. And he's waggling his wings and his flaps and stuff, trying to get my attention to get me down. Well, he was in restricted airspace over San Francisco. And he tells a great story about that. One night on the East Coast, Jack Gerould, you mentioned you had Jack on the show. And of course, his family had the racetrack there. And we were doing an IndyCar event at New Hampshire. And so Jack wanted to have Bobby and Paul and I come down to the racetrack and drive Legends cars. And so they arranged a couple of helicopters to fly us down. It was an hour helicopter flight or more. And we did it. And so, Jack and Paul, those are the guys that had racing experience. Me, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I've Legends car. So the night's over, fog's rolling in, helicopter pilot's really nervous. We leave the racetrack, we get up and we start our move north, and the visibility is not good enough. And the pilot's saying, we can't do this. And in typical Bobby Unser fashion, son, tell you, just duck down there. See those cars, see those taillights? Just follow those taillights. They go right through the pass in the mountains here. We don't have to worry about that. And we're saying, Bobby, you're going to get us killed. And basically, thankfully, the pilot wouldn't listen to him. He said, no, we cannot fly under these conditions. And so we ended up going back to the racetrack, and Jack Geroud's dad ended up driving us back up to our hotel there where we were staying for the IndyCar race. But, Bobby, he just generated great stories, and God, we loved him. He was so special.
And you got to almost blame Parnelli for Bobby, because Parnelli was Harold. What was his name? Harold Fangler. What his name was? He got him to where he gave him his rookie test, because they weren't going to give him a rookie test.
Oh, is that
Parnelli
right?
Went
I
down
didn't
there
know that.
And Parnelli went down there and got on him and said, no, you're going to give him a test. He deserves it. So we can almost blame Parnelli for Uncle Bobby.
Well, he had a great career. I mean, all of the
Unsers
family, and just you think about what they mean to the sport, and good people. Always enjoyed them.
Yeah, we had Paul Goldsmith. We had Paul Goldsmith on the show, and of course, he's a pilot. He runs that airport or has that airport, works at it. I forget now, and he kind of taught Bobby how to properly fly. And he was just talking about, he goes, I taught Bobby how to fly, and I said, "Are you proud of that?" Or
Yeah.
yeah. But you talk about a great guy, Paul Goldsmith. No, that's a really good guy too.
95, I think he's like 96 now, and he still works every single day.
Every day.
Is that right?
Yep.
In his mid-90s. That's amazing. And I love it. Great to hear that.
Absolutely. So, obviously you've been around so many different sporting events. How did the Indy 500 really compare for you to other sporting events, or kind of what did it mean? I mean, obviously it's the largest single day sporting event, right? But I'm sure you've been around Super Bowls and, other huge sporting events, NBA finals. Kind of what was Indy 500 compared to some of those for you?
Well, it has a niche right at or near the top. I mean, when you compare all the events, I mean, the Super Bowl is unbelievable for a one weekend type of an event. And you folks in Indy had that experience not that many years ago.
Right.
And so, I mean, the impact that it has. But the Indy 500, the thing that I love when I look back about my time relating to Indianapolis and the 500 was the fact that it was in its prime. And that's what I remember most. And it was, two of the greatest experiences of my life were being able to file a report from the pace car, the head of the field, 2 different occasions when there was a legitimate 350 to 400,000 people encircling that racetrack. And it makes the hair on my arm stand up right now, just thinking about that. And to me, you talk about, I call them magic moments in sports, and those were just beyond description or belief. And just that the magnitude of the crowd. And even though in certain ways, the renovations and one thing or another, and there's been a resurgence in recent years, which I love. And I think Roger Penske and Doug Bowles have done such an amazing job at Indianapolis and extending the tradition and building and enhancing that tradition. You can't describe it to people. You have to be there. But I remember going back, and I'll go back to those early times when I was filing those reports the first week in May. We'd go to Indy, and the first weekend in qualifying, and people can't begin to understand that now, that you had well over 100,000 people, well over 100,000 people on the first weekend of qualifying. And what a huge experience that was. And to be able to participate in that. Paul, bless his heart, pulled some strings, and I don't think that they were blowing smoke, but at the time I spent a few years doing on the radio network, and I was told that I was the first non-Hoosier to be involved as part of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway radio network. And
wow.
That was super cool as far as I was concerned. But being able to be part of that group and working in the pits, and at that time, it was Howdy Bell, and it was Bob. Oh no. I'm drawing a blank. I shouldn't have never gone down this road. But the names of the past that worked on the Speedway radio network. And I've got him pictured in my mind, and he worked in the pits, and he always did Victory Lane on the radio network. Oh, it's making me angry that I can't think of his name right now. But, it was Bob Jenkins, and then Jerry Baker, and former play-by-play voice of the Colts all those years.
Yeah.
Bob Lamey?
Yeah.
Lamey,
Yes.
yeah, Bob Lamey, of course.
Bob Lamey.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize. Bob, all these, what great talent, and to work with, and to get to spend your month away in the qualifying shows and doing that, and then getting a chance to go to the TV side and be involved. The late 80s, I think, was my first year at Indy on the ABC television side. And all of the great people that you got to work with there over the years. And so it was just an amazing time. And then, of course, then came the split, and then came the tough times, and filling long days at Indianapolis because they didn't have the power plants and the IRL, and they had to budget, how much time a team could actually be on the track, and yet we were having to fill 5 or 6 hours on a daily basis of television for ESPN. And there's so many different memories about that place. A lot of love, as far as I'm concerned.
So I've got my Uncle Bobby story is I was in a hotel room. I'd been the night before the 500 mid race the night before, and we were tired. Rob and I were in there, and we were in the old Speedway motel room.
Mm-hmm.
And we're laying there, and it's raining, and we fell asleep on the bed, and we just kept hearing somebody talking and talking and talking. Woke up, and it's Uncle Bobby, and he's talking to Parnelli, and he's going, "Rufus, these teams ain't got no money, Rufus. None of them got any money." He said, "There's no money." He just kept going on and on and on. It was just, it was typical Bobby Unser.
Yep.
It was just funny, but it really, he was speaking out of a concern.
Yes.
I feel like it was really, he was more concerned about where things were headed.
Well, so many of those guys, whether it was Mario or AJ or Rutherford or the Unsers, Rick Mears, such great ambassadors for the sport.
Yes.
And then, carry it on and the charisma of an Elio Castro Neves and Tony Kanaan and some of those folks. And now, you've got a whole new generation of young drivers that are coming in there and making their marks very impressively. And I hope that they have an appreciation for those who paved the way. And that was one of the things that I learned from Paul Page, and, because he had such a great appreciation and his love of the sport, but going back, way back to some of those who, helped pave the way and make the sport what it was able to grow into. I hope that none of those people ever forget that, because the heritage is important. And as you get older, you get a little more philosophical about those things.
Well, we talked to Mark James a little bit about this and Paul, and the one nice thing, at least from that side of it, is there's still lineage that you can draw right back to Sid Collins, and they use the basis of what was built there. Of course, they all put their own twist on it, as you have to as time goes on. But you can really still draw that line back to that, and then you take with the driving side of it. I mean, I feel like a lot of the drivers today do have an appreciation for the past, and some are, I think, historians of it. I think what would seem to happen, especially like someone like Dario Franchitti, of course, obviously he doesn't drive today, was, he wins it, and then that's when he gains his whole respect for it.
Yeah.
Like, because
my favorite
once you
people.
win it, yeah.
I saw him.
Once you win it, you see the magnitude, right? A Will Power sees it.
Sure.
Of course, that's why they want to win it again, too.
Yeah. Absolutely. And thank God for people like that. I mean, you think about, a Donald Davidson and what he has done over all of the years in keeping the history, bringing it to life. A Derek Daly, and now his son Connor is a driver. And you look at a Tony Kanaan and some of these different ones who maintain and bring the history. And, AJ, Mario has been such a tremendous ambassador for the sport in my mind for generations now. He's 82 years old as I am, and yet here he is. He's still out there, driving the 2-seater, one thing or another. I love it. I mean, keep those traditions alive. And I go back to, if it's Doug Bowles and Roger Penske or the people who run the Speedway, how important those things are. The museum, the ongoing tributes, they find ways each and every year, whether it's, Dave First, if it's Kurt Cavan, working with the Speedway now, Steve Shunk, all of these people who are keeping this sport alive and welcoming and paving the way for these young drivers. And it's still exciting. It's really exciting. I love seeing Dario there in Ganassi's pit this last weekend, the IndyCar race up at Portland, And it's just, I watch as much every event as I can. Got a great, you got 5 guys alive in the championship going to Laguna Seca next week. And what more could you ask for? That's tremendously entertaining. And yet I know it's still, when you look at the big picture in terms of sports impact, it's still, in a sense, it's almost like a niche sport. And yes, the fan base is aging. I hope they never do away with ovals. I mean, I love the oval tracks, and they don't seem to have the magic that they once had. But man, you want to talk about great hair-raising racing. And I want to see Kyle Larson in IndyCar before his career is over.
Absolutely.
I think he could school some folks. I'm a huge Kyle Larson fan.
Yeah, he's a special talent. Right along with Stewart, right along with AJ, right along with Parnelli, Mario. I mean, he's part of that.
Tony Stewart. You keep thinking of different guys, and the imprint that they made on the sport during their years as drivers.
Right. Unfortunately, and I cheated a little bit. I watched you on another podcast. You guys were talking about F1 a little bit, and they mentioned, talking about the race in Vegas coming up, and the resurgence or the emergence, however you want to put it, of F1 in America. And now you're starting to see a little bit here and there these young American drivers. I shouldn't even say American, young IndyCar drivers.
Mm-hmm.
Now are starting to kind of start looking like a few of them are going head to F1, and you're like, man, it's great for them, but boy, you sure hate to lose these young drivers to Europe, the F1. And while I guess it's not a competition because they're two different styles of motorsports, you sure want to see IndyCar be the bigger sport. But unfortunately, at this time, it's just not happening.
Yeah, it's in a way, it's cyclical. And I remember back, way back when young drivers aspired to run Indianapolis. And then with the explosive success of NASCAR, the pendulum swung in that direction, and they wanted to become, NASCAR drivers. And now, as you say, because F1 is going through an explosive growth period right now, and the younger dynamic, the younger range of age of fans. I ran into a guy on a golf course just the other day, and he was just raving about how he's become such a big F1 fan. He's a young guy. And I thought there's a perfect example of how these things go cyclically. But you mentioned, I mean, with Course of America in Texas, and with Vegas, and with Miami, going to have 3 venues now in the United States. And you look at the numbers that they're getting in terms of the interest and the money that's being involved there. No wonder guys want to, they're thinking, get to F1 if you can. The Vegas experience, I'm just so excited to see how that all turns out, because looking back, Paul Page and I were part of the F1 experience in Vegas at Caesar's Palace. It was the early 80s.
Like 81? 82, 81, 82, something like that.
And then they had a couple of years where they ran the IndyCars on that they made it into a distorted oval. The road course that they had set up was an absolute joke at the parking lot of Caesar's Palace. But it was an interesting time. Roger Penske came on and joined our NBC broadcasts for those events. I did
see that. I watched that not too long ago.
Yeah. And I was so envious because he had Dan Luganville as his right-hand man, who provides him with all of the background and information. And he's got these booklets and flip pages and bio background. And I'm thinking, holy smokes, it's got nice to be Roger Penske. But he was terrific. And he brought, people forget that Roger was a driver, and people forget that he had Mark Donohue and that they had F1 experience in one thing or another. And it was a very logical move to make him a part of those broadcasts. But it was fun, even though you think back, my God, that's 40 years ago. That's crazy.
It is crazy in a lot of ways that, like you mentioned, like Roger, of course, Roger, like you said, a lot of people don't even know he was considered the greatest amateur driver at his time.
Terrific. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and he literally made a business choice.
Yeah.
With the help of his father's encouragement, he made a business choice, but he never left the sport. And he's gotten a lot from the sport, and he's given a lot back to the sport. So, I mean,
Well,
hats off to him.
I always felt like his teams from the IndyCar side set the standard in terms of hospitality, media relations, fan involvement, one thing or another. I mean, there was no stone that wasn't overturned. And if there was a way to make things better and more effective, they were the team that would find out how to do it. And then you looked at how the other teams began to rise to the occasion, and you look now at the success of the Ganassi operation and the Andretti operation and the Ray Lanigan, et cetera, operation, and so on and so forth. So Roger, he set a standard that was extraordinary. And I think any motorsports fan, there's a debt of gratitude that's owed to Roger Penske. And then, he carried it over and built the success in NASCAR. And then you look at the road course operations and the teams they have there competing. And again, just great stuff. And I have great appreciation for him and their operation, and love the folks. Last time I was at Indianapolis, I took my son. It was 5-6 years ago, the 100th anniversary event, and Rogers. They had a wonderful acknowledgement of their success in the museum, and I had a chance to talk to him for a brief period of time out at the racetrack and commending him on all of that. And in typical Roger Penske fashion, as only he would do, he says, "Well, Gary, you were a big part of that." Well, no, I wasn't a big part of that, but it still flatters the heck out of you when Roger Penske tells you that, and the way they embraced us in the media in one thing or another.
I don't know. I tend to agree with Roger. I think when you have passionate people who love what they're doing and are involved with something, they add something that they bring something that somebody else just couldn't, who they didn't have that, so I tend to agree with Roger on that.
Well, that's kind. And I think about, Vince Welch and Jamie Little and Todd Harris and Jack Arute and Dr. Jerry Punch and Jerry Gappins. He worked a couple of years in the pits at Indy, and all of these people. I mean, we shared so much. Jan Beekes, Jan on his years and running as a driver, and then his knowledge and became Professor B, and the things that he did and how he learned television and generated such good feature pieces, technical pieces, and one thing or another. And I again, just blessed to have so many people that you work with who share that passion and who love the sport and would, do anything in their power to make it better. Good stuff.
Now, let me ask you something, and this may not be fair, and you can tell me you don't want to answer it. Somebody like Paul Tracy, right? Who is a wild card always. Like, when I like watching Paul announce, because Paul had people, again, may forget, Paul Tracy was a hell of a race car driver.
Hell of a race car driver.
And his words carry weight. And but as an announcer, as seeing that, do you, because he's not a hot take guy, but he's a tell it how he sees it kind of guy.
Absolutely. And I appreciated that about Paul. And we had a couple of discussions after he got into the broadcast thing about that. And frankly, I was surprised, because I didn't anticipate that would be something that Paul might enjoy doing when that offer was made to him and he joined the NBC bunch. But, Paul was always his own guy, and he could be abrasive, and yet he was always a straight shooter. As far as I was concerned, and you doing a pit report, he was going to tell you, just how things were, and he wouldn't pull any punches. And that obviously carried over to his broadcast career. And there were a couple of times when I had a chance to attend an IndyCar race or an event where he was involved in the broadcast, and we had a chance to spend some time and talk about that. And I just, you miss that. I think they've got a great crew right now.
I do too. I think James Hinchcliffe is amazing. I think James is awesome.
Hinch has brought so much into it. and Townsend, not referring to Kevin and the guys that work in the pits, but
Right.
just that booth combination. And it was great. And when Robin Miller was involved with them, and he would plant the seed and he would prod Tracy, and he'd bring it out, and that was great. It was good, entertaining television, and they did a great job. I mean, that's a different little era in the always emerging revolution of television broadcasting. And it's just you think of the characters, and you think of the ones that you have fun with. You think of the flamboyance of different ones, and I relish some of the times with AJ, even though he could, 1 week he could be your best friend, and the next week, and I'll give you a quick AJ story here, if I may.
Yeah,
please do.
Please.
Absolutely do.
We were doing the Michigan 500. AJ had a really bad accident, slammed into, they had the guardrail then, they didn't have the attenuator, and it was a scary time. And you remember, Merle Bentonhausen lost an arm because of an accident like that. Well, AJ had a severe crash at Michigan at the Infield Care Center hospital. They're treating him. He came out and he did one interview, and it would be for television. And we were NBC at that time. And he was gracious and talked to us before he went on to the hospital for further treatment. Next week, Pocono 500. AJ has motor problems. I anticipated that they were going to have to get out of the race, and that he wouldn't, knowing AJ, he wouldn't go to the pits. He would go to the garage. And at that time at Michigan, the garages were at a kind of a sunken level. They scooped out the infield, and the garages were down, maybe 30 feet below where the racetrack and the pits were. So I grabbed my cameraman and said, we're going to the garage, because I know he's going to come to the garage. And sure enough, the motor fails. He coasts around. He comes down the hill. He pulls right up near us. The garage door is closed. And I can hear from the cockpit with the helmet on, "You can tell NBC to kiss my bleeping ass." And well, what's going on? I mean, this was my buddy just 7 days ago at Michigan. A second time as he's climbing out and we're moving into position, "You can tell NBC to kiss my bleeping ass." And he storms in and he goes through the small garage door and out of the darkness in there a third time. "You can tell NBC to kiss my bleeping." As it turned out, I found out later, I said, "AJ, what's the deal? What do we do?" And he got turned upside down because NBC ran some kind of a feature piece that week about Pat Patrick and his operation. And AJ was incensed, and he let the wrath go. We never did get an interview with AJ when he went out of that race at Pocono, but that's how much it changed from one Sunday to the next.
He's something else. He's moved on to this status of people are, that's just AJ. He's older now. Yeah. There was a time where people were really fearful.
Talk about intimidation. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one scowl from that Texan and you'd be shuddering. Yeah, I mean, he was really intimidating. Another one of those classics. We were at Nazareth and Jeff Andretti put him out of the race.
Yeah, I was going to ask if I thought that was you.
Yeah, and I didn't even basically ask the question. The microphone was out, and I don't remember the exact count. I think it was 8 swear words in 23 seconds or something like that on live television. And all you could say was, "That's vintage AJ Foyt." He was not happy.
Did they, I know now, like, TV's delayed, right? Because they can beep out words and stuff. Could they do that back then?
Interesting question. I think at that time there was, I don't know, they implemented, it was like a 7-second delay. But at that particular event, nothing got cut.
Nothing got cut.
Right? Yeah, because it was live, and every once in a while that'll show up somewhere. Somebody will run across that, and it'll resurface. And every time I play it, I laugh out loud because it was so much AJ at his romp, stomping, roaring best.
And that's really one of
it's
the most iconic AJ interviews. I mean, there's several, right? There's that the Coogan one, Kevin Cogan, him hammering on his car, and then obviously
throwing a computer one time.
Yeah, the
yeah, I was
computer.
gonna say
Ari
one of the
Leyendijk.
many laptops that have been destroyed over the years.
Yeah, yeah.
And then Ari Leyendijk almost got destroyed as well.
That's right.
Right.
The bitch slap down at Texas. I wasn't working that event. Paul was working that one, and I can't remember if it was Jack that was in the pits. That may have been on a different network at that time. But yeah, that was a classic.
I remember Tony George having to get in there and get him off of him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That my dad worked. He was a crew chief for Spike Gillhausen for years, and his dad said that one year, Foyt always wanted the pit next to them for some reason. They always pitted by him. He said Foyt was having problems that whole year, and he said invariably every race, AJ would get out of his car after he had a problem, and he'd come right over to their pit stand, and then tell them how to run their pits. he said it seemed like it happened every week. He said he's telling you, say, this is what you're doing wrong, that's what you're doing wrong. And he go, well, AJ, you're out of the race. So he just, there's some people who get away with that, right? I mean, there are some people who absolutely could say it the same exact way, who would be in trouble forever. And for some reason, there are some people who just have this way of just getting away with saying things and doing things like that. And it's just, it's funny how the personalities work, you know.
You talk about icons of a sport. I mean, he's
Right.
there at the head of the list. There's no question about it.
Hey,
Right. Yeah.
a question I was going to ask, you've already kind of answered it, but obviously you were known for being a pit reporter with IndyCar. How many, I mean, obviously, like, you talk to people sometimes after they win races, stuff like that, but like you were saying with AJ, sometimes you have to approach drivers and talk to them when they're not having a good day. And I was just going to kind of ask, like, what kind of moments kind of stand out for you, like any awkward, and I'm sure like the AJ moments definitely fit in there, but just awkward moments where you were just like, I wish I wasn't here having to talk to this person right now, but it's my job.
It's hard. I mean, it really is hard. And I've always prided myself. I think I have compassion for people and what they're going, and empathy for what they're going through.
Sure. And
as soon as you said that, Aaron, the first thing that cropped into my mind, I had an experience early in my career at Phoenix with Al Unser, Big Al. And he had a situation. It was the last race of the season. It was like in November. It was traditional that Phoenix opened the season and closed the season on the IndyCar circuit at that time. And Al had a problem, was knocked out of the race. I don't remember the circumstances about it, but I know he was hot. And a camera guy and I were running across. At that time, the infield was like the desert at Phoenix International.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this is going back a lot of years. And I can see him. He's shaking his head. No. He didn't want anything to do with it. And I've got a producer from the truck who was a feisty, fiery guy. His name was Matthew McCarthy. And he's in my ear and said, Gary, get that microphone in his face. I mean, he was commanding me. And there was no way that I could back out of it. And Al, I don't remember what he said, but whatever he said, it was something that he would not have said had he had some cool down time. Fast forward to the next season, first race, Friday, we're there at Phoenix, saying hello to teams, drivers, car owners, crew members, doing your homework, getting ready for a new season. I see Al, I walk up to him to shake hands with him, and he kind of reluctantly hesitated. He shook my hand and he said something to the effect, "You're a lucky son of a bitch that I didn't just now deck you." And I said, wait a minute, what's up? He said, that interview you did with me at the end, and I told you I didn't want to do it at the end of last season. He said, I got so much flack from families and kids and stuff who saw that, and he was still livid about that. And I really was lucky that he didn't just knock me out the daylights out of me. And he didn't, thankfully. But I learned a really valuable lesson. And we ended up talking then for some extended period of time about that and how would it be best for me to handle that. And he said, I need 2 minutes, or I need whatever to kind of cool down and compose my thoughts. And so anytime in the future, I would either advise the truck, remember, he needs a couple of minutes before we stick a microphone in his face. And the truck people were usually pretty good about that. And if they were pushing me, I just dragged my feet, or one reason or another, we'd have a problem with a camera, or, to give him time to cool down. So what could have been a very ugly situation came kind of a detente, and that's kind of diffused the whole deal. But it taught me a very valuable lesson. You've got to know the trigger points for all of these people. It's not just Al Unser, and you never know how somebody's going to react with a microphone thrust in their face. And one of the things that I always try to encourage my cameramen, they want to get that shot. They want to be right in there. They want to be as tight as they can. Well, sometimes the lens of that camera is out here, is only this far from a guy's nose or his hat bill or whatever. And I have to talk to the cameraman after. I say, you don't know how intimidating that is, especially if you're somebody who hasn't worked in the business, to have a television lens literally 6 inches from your face. And you've got to find a way. You can get the focus, you can get the shot, it can be tight, it can fill the screen, but you can do it from 3 feet back, not 6 inches. And so it's kind of interesting how those things, blossom out. But you're right in the sense that it's part of your job. Journalistically, you want to do your job. You want to, if you're confronted with having to ask the tough question, then you've got to find a way to do it. And I know in the latter years when I was no longer doing Indy cars and I was doing drag racing, and so many times producer at that point in drag racing, it wasn't the guy who pulled off the stunning upset. They wanted to hear from the hero who had just got dumped on the sidelines. And I would resist that. I say, the story right now is the emotion of the young guy who just pulled off the greatest run of his life.
Right.
The emotion from the veteran who got unseated is still going to be there. Sometimes I win the battle and sometimes I didn't. And I have a very even temperament that I've prided myself in over the years. And I've had 2 or 3 instances I remember I would get so angry at that, and people knew it around me at the top end of the drag strip. And they said, what's the matter? And I said, well, it's a television thing right now. And I've got to get a hold of myself here and just accept it and do my job. But it's a big challenge. And I think you could talk to any pit reporter. Today's era, the era when I was doing it, whatever. And I'm sure that they'd be almost unanimous in saying that's probably the toughest thing you have to do, is to be there when things have not gone well. And to me, you always try to put yourself in their shoes. This is something that they've been aspiring to. Maybe they've never won the Indy 500. They've come so close. I think of Michael Andretti and the Andretti family. Mm-hmm. They're kind of the trademark for that story at Indianapolis. You've got to put yourself in their shoes and remember, this is not just write it off disappointment. This is gut-wrenching disappointment. And if you can get them somehow to feel comfortable enough with you that they convey that emotion in telling, what took them out of the race or what happened, then you've done your job and you've done it well. And you can't always do it that well, but that's what you strive to do each and every time. And you have to remind yourself of those things all the time, because we're all human, and sometimes you start to take things a little bit for granted, and you just, you can't do it. You've got to remember that and try to remember what they're feeling, what they're thinking. that's kind of the credo that I've always tried to live by and execute when I've got a microphone in my hand.
Now I'm going to ask you something. And I've asked this to a few people in the pit reporter world, Nat. And this is something that I firmly believe. I feel, of course, you watch 500 every year, or as much as you can, and I feel while the pageantry of the elevator ride, all that's cool. I don't like the idea of doing the interview on top of that. I think you need to have that person's first emotions
When they get out of
immediately upon when they get out of the car.
No, I agree. But the traditions and the protocols at an event such as the Indy 500 are so significant that, I mean, if television had their way, I'm sure that would be what they would want to do. But you gotta give and take. And there are things, and I don't know if it's written into contracts or not. I have no idea about any of that. But it's a totally different emotion 10 minutes after they get out of the car than it is
2
when they
minutes.
immediately get. Yeah. I mean,
2 minutes.
it's huge. And that was one of the things I did. I did a lot of victory lane interviews over the years. And, now they basically legislate it by whoever is covering that pit ends up doing that interview in victory lane. And I have no objection to that. But for the bulk of the time when I was doing it, Jack always did Indianapolis. I did Indianapolis victory lane only one time. But all the other events, I was almost always the guy it was ESPN, ABC, NBC, whatever, who did victory lane. And you love that elation as soon as the helmet comes off, the sweat's there, they're still kind of chest may be heaving, and they're so elated, and you want to be able to share that emotion. You want it to be real for the television viewer. And I, because of my radio background, so many different times I was thinking about that, watching the end of the NASCAR race as well as the IndyCar race this weekend. But the NASCAR race ends. TV does its interview out on the track as after the burnout, and then the radio guy has to wait until they get back in there, and that emotion of that moment is gone. And so it's tough for radio, but television pays the money for the rights, and it's a big number as opposed to what radio pays. And so television they're the king in that sense. But when it comes to your point about the elevator ride at Indy and all of that, television is a prince, not a king. They just they don't have the wherewithal to do that.
I think you take a Helio Castroneves just saying, "I'm not going to do what you guys want me to do. I'm going to go celebrate my fourth win with the fans." He runs all the way down the front straightaway. I mean, you can't script those
television
moments
as you can ever get right there.
You can't script it.
No, you can't. And I happened to be, I was doing victory lane at Detroit at Belle Isle when he won his first ever IndyCar event.
Okay.
And we had no idea what in the world he was doing. And it wasn't a big high fence like you have at Indianapolis. It was a much smaller fence, but he went to it and he was climbing up there and getting that interview with him after he got down, and he was still so fired up, and he has so much charisma, as we all know. But that's one of those that I'll never forget. It was his first one, and it's become, the Spider-Man trademark for Elio. And I want to see him win, because I want to see him climb that fence, and I want to see his team join him, and I want to see the fans respond to it. And that fourth one at Indianapolis was an all-timer. That was some of the greatest television that you'll ever see in terms of motorsports or any other sport, in my mind.
I agree. And it was like it coming off the previous year, and how everything was shut down and there was no fans.
Right. There were no fans and all that.
And I mean, it was like for the first time you could say, "Oh man, things seem okay."
Yeah.
I mean, it's really the first genuine moment.
We're back.
Yeah,
absolutely.
One thing I wanted to ask, so we have this conversation with Paul Page. Obviously, he was successful with radio and TV. He always said that he always thought that his style fit radio the best. He enjoyed doing radio the best. That was what he enjoyed the most. But he did the TV stuff and he still enjoyed it. For you, and I'm guessing, yeah, as much as you're on the radio now, I'm guessing it's probably something similar with you. But was it the same thing where you feel like your style fits radio the best, or maybe you don't feel that way? I don't know.
I don't know if it's so much style in my instance.
Mhm.
Paul and I
Sure.
talked about that many, many times. We were big believers in, paying your dues and working your way up, and the benefits of radio and being able to articulate thoughts. And I mean, Paul is a wordsmith, and you look at not only what he was doing with the radio network at the Speedway, but then you look at, and the style, it came so much from Sid Collins. There was so much of Sid in what Paul did, in my opinion, in the early years of him doing radio at the Speedway. And then television becomes a different animal. But Paul he was a master at structuring things. And then when he got into television, you go back and look at the opens for the Indy 500s that ABC did, and the Top Gun themes and one thing or another, and the music and the words that were structured. I mean, Paul, you talk about labor intensive, the hours that he would put into that 3 minutes. And Don Ohlmeyer, who was the producer at that time of the ABC telecast, was such a huge believer in that. And those two would work in tandem. And I mean, they agonized over words and phrases and shots that would match up, or words that would match, the shots they had from a television standpoint. And I marvel at, and they've stood the test of time. And those were from the early 90s and through that stretch. And you go back and look at them now and you say, sure, there are things that technically could be improved on that we get used to as television continues to evolve. But those, you put them on the air right now, and I guarantee you, people don't turn away from that.
I mean, to this day, people still talk about the Delta Force theme.
Yep.
And then when I think about Paul Page, that's like the first thing I think of, and a lot of people, it just had so much of an impact, and for people to still talk about it, and like you said, for it to still be really relevant 22 years later or whatever, 30 years later.
Yeah, 30 years.
It just shows, it's really ahead of the time, and just great piece of work. And I know a lot of people do like mashups of the Delta Force, and they do it with like new video, whatever. That's a big thing people do on YouTube.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, if they could ever bring that back, that'd be pretty amazing.
Well, I went to see Top Gun Maverick here a few weeks back. I said, I'm going to wait until, things die down a little bit. I don't like going to the theater with 1 million people. I love being there with, a dozen people in the
Sure.
theater. But I wanted to see, and I'm not a big movie guy, but I wanted to see, the treatment. And I walked out of there and I loved it. I just thought it was great entertainment. I thought that from a cinematographic standpoint, and from, the music and the sound effects and the story, everything, to me, it was 2.5 hours of great entertainment. And of course, that music, hearing that again, and that just, it gets the blood going. For me, I'm thinking Indy, because I'm not thinking about fighter jets and all of that, but it's a great combination.
Right. Well,
No, I was going to say, you talked about Mario being such a great ambassador for the sport. Now, Aaron has been lucky enough to ride the 2-seater with Mario.
I have.
Yeah.
Just
Me
this past. Oh, really? When did you do it?
Yeah, I did it at the now defunct racetrack in Chicago. That was
Oh,
adjacent
wow.
horse track there. It was a paperclip racetrack.
Yep.
And Mario gave me great treatment. We treated it like a qualifying run. They came in, put fresh tires on, a couple warm-up laps. We did 8 laps altogether. It was
Nice.
an amazing experience. So I'm sure that your experience, Aaron, is something that you got to cherish.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually the certificate right up there. But
Was it right? Yeah.
because they give you like a certificate. So I did it this past May, the day after the race at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So to go around the oval, And I'm sure it's a similar experience for you, just like when you're on and it was a different racetrack, obviously, but just looking ahead of you and just seeing Mario's helmet, which is a very iconic helmet design.
Mhm.
It's pretty special for sure, knowing that
Oh,
you're riding with
absolutely.
one of the greatest, arguably the greatest race car driver of all time.
Yeah, he's special, and we've had a great bond over the years. And I've got a couple of photos and stuff that I have up on display that, and Mario is featured in a couple of those. And I think back to different times when our paths would cross, and dirt tracks. I love going to sprint car races and one thing or another. And Mario's love, he and Aldo coming from Italy and running dirt tracks and one thing or another. And it just, there's a lot there that I think we share. And he's always been one of my very favorite people.
Absolutely. Well, you have anything else, Scott?
Hey, I'm going to ask him. I'm going to ask. Now, I do this for a select few people.
Uh-oh.
Your best, and you've shared some great ones. Your best racing story that you can share.
Oh my. There's so many. Scott, I've never been good at, defining one.
Hey,
Sometimes
pick one.
have to think about.
I'll tell you what, you
like,
pick one, then we'll have you back, and you pick a different one. We'll have you back, you pick a different one. We'll just keep doing that.
Well, we talked about, I mentioned, the pace car and filing reports at the start of the 500 on two different occasions. That was absolutely magical to me. I absolutely love that. There are stories that, are poignant. There are stories that are heartrending. Having to break the news at Ontario that Scott, dear Lord, Greg Moore had lost his life at Ontario with an interview with, I think it was Dr. Stephen Olvey. To this day, when I think about that, it just, it rips your heart. There are stories like that. There are stories like you think of what happened to Alex Zanardi.
Right.
Being in Germany, that race, when he came literally within a millimeter of an inch of his losing his life, and taking him from the track to the trauma center in Munich and the subsequent recovery, etc. When he was at his prime and winning IndyCar championships, I remember at the end of one season, we did a long sit-down interview for television, and it lasted probably a half hour or so. And that, only snippets of it would ever end up making the air. But it was the first time in my life when, at the end of that interview, he got up and he came to me and he just put his arms around me and embraced me and told me that he loved me. And I you can't put a price tag on moments like that, but it speaks to the wonderful people that we all have a chance to grow close to. And that's always, of course, a danger in motorsports in particular. You grow close to people and then somehow too many of them are taken away. And it's gotten phenomenally better in recent years, but you still think of a Dan Weldon and you think of a Scott Brayton and
Sure.
you think of a Jovi, I can't think of his last name, but different.
Jovi Marcello.
Yeah,
Marcel. Thank you. Yeah. Just so many that we've lost, and it'll happen again. Even with all of the great safety improvements, unfortunately, it'll happen again. You'll run into some situation that's never occurred before, but that's what I was always tried to remember and remind myself and my cameraman. You're never totally safe at a racetrack. I think about the great fire at Michigan in the pits, the Michigan 500. Bruce Jenner was working one of his first events for NBC. That time, he and I were the pit guys. and Paul and Charlie Jones, and I can't remember if it was Johnny Rutherford who was in the booth, but I remember as that fire, I saw it, and we all know that follow racing, methanol burns clean. You don't see a flame.
Right.
But as other things ignite that are combustible, you saw golf carts burning, you saw fuel tanks literally breathing, moving in and out, these and huge amounts of fuel for 500-mile race early in the race. And you see this moving from one pit to another. And I think it involved 3 total pits and maybe a fraction of a fourth or a fifth. And I remember clearly thinking, this may be the end. This may be the end of motorsports. I mean, that thought went through my mind. I thought they're never going to be able to put this fire out. I really felt that way. It was that intense and it was that bad in those 3 pits. And of course, they were able to put it out, thank God. And only minimal, a couple of people got some fairly minor burns. But so you talk about different things and stories and things that are imprinted in your brain. And you see, I jump from one to another, to another, to another. But there are so many of them. And some of them are tremendous, great memories. And some of them are poignant and they're kind of heartbreaking memories as well.
You know, you can look at that fire in Michigan, though, and say that the reason it wasn't as tragic as it could have been, was because of the horrible gasoline fires they'd had in years past, and they'd switched to methanol. And, you know, methanol, obviously, it will burn. I mean, that's what it does, but it is a lot easier to put out. It's a lot easier to control. It doesn't ignite like gasoline does. The fumes don't ignite. So you know.
Well, this last weekend at Portland, seeing Connor Daly and his car catch fire, and him having to come out of there and feeling the heat very intensely, particularly on one of his shoulders. And it's just it's a quick reminder that when you're dealing with this kind of energy and force on a racetrack, and then if it's in drag racing, it's not methanol, it's the
you got nitromethane
and the energy that's there that can be unleashed can do horrific things. And I love that the standards of safety standards have gotten so much better. And you know, every week you see impacts with the safer barrier, and you see it cave in slow motion and rebound. And you think about, had that been just like a concrete wall, like it was 40 years ago or something, we'd be talking about fatalities, super bad injuries, crippling injuries. Talk about the fire, Dax McDonald and those early years at Indy. And you think about all the drivers that were lost in Formula One and Indy cars and occasionally in NASCAR. I mean, it's horrific. And then you look at what we have going, these drivers have going, teams have going for them now. It's just absolutely no comparison. Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
When you look at, you know, I mean, people can, there's arguments to be made. People could be upset at Tony George, although I understand why he did what he did. Maybe it's one of those things where there was a lot of people involved that could have done things differently, not just Tony.
Oh yeah, but I mean, it's easy to look back and second guess on any of those types of things. Yeah.
But I will tell you this: the greatest achievement is Softer Walls. Tony George spearheading that is one of the absolute, along with fire suits, along with bladders, along with methanol.
Classic.
You know,
and we are indebted to him for that. Yeah. I've enjoyed the opportunity to reminisce a little bit, and thank you both, Aaron and Scott, for your interest, and wish you the best in your future endeavors.
Well, G-Man, thank you so much. We appreciate it. It's been an absolute pleasure, and never ever discount the fact that you come into those people's houses and their cars and in their lives, and you make such a huge difference for 2.5 hours, 3 hours.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Appreciate
that.
So thank you.
Yep. Thank you,
All
Gary.
right.
Appreciate it.
See you down the road.